Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on this Monday, December 12, 2016, to engage with our presenters as part of the Guidelines International Network North American Webinar Series. This is Tom Getchus. I'm the Clinical Practice Director at the American Academy of Neurology in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the Chair of the GIN North America community. Before I turn this over to Mary Nix, today's moderator, I'd like to thank you for your participation in GIN North America events and draw your attention to a few upcoming events. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about some GIN activity in 2016. We hosted 6 webinars and had over 850 people register for these webinars. We believe that these webinars provide value to you, your staff, your members, or your guideline developers, and we plan to continue them in 2017. We had a very active and informative session at our international conference in Philadelphia with over 20 webinar suggestions, many of them that we will try to incorporate into 2017. And finally, we have some planning underway, if you haven't heard, for the 3rd EGAPS conference in New York City on March 20 and 21. When we asked for your responses on that GIN survey, many of you stated you'd attend webinars on topics such as meeting demands of updated guidelines, shared decision making, dealing with non-financial COI, rapid reviews, or how to start a guidelines program. I encourage you to add my email, tgetchus@AAN, to your address book, or connect with us in any of these other ways through the website, through Twitter, or through LinkedIn. You'll receive information such as upcoming conference announcements, job postings, webinars, profiles of many of our steering committee members, and some micro polls as a means to obtain feedback on where GIN North America meets your needs and where we can improve. We know that you're experiencing survey fatigue, and the steering committee is thinking of ways to obtain meaningful info from you, our community, in very thoughtful ways. And if at any time you have an idea for a future webinar suggestion, please type it in the chat box so we can capture it. Before I turn it over to Mary, I'm going to open up this poll here and just see who's in the audience. You can select more than one of these, whether you're a guideline developer, a consumer, a researcher, or a physician. And this is very important to us as we think about today's session. Just to see and get a sense of who's in the audience. You'll see earlier I said that we had over 850 people that had registered for webinars in 2016. This webinar alone garnered over 280 registrations. So we're pleased to see that many of you are coming to these webinars. So I think you can see these results. I'm going to close this poll. And you can see almost 60% of you are guideline developers, almost 20% consumers, which is great, and researchers making up that next portion. So obviously these are going to add up to more than 100% because you can select more than one response. And then finally, it's kind of hard for us to capture unless you have everybody that you forward this to or everybody that's with you. If you're forwarding this link to more than one person, but we'd like to get a sense of how many people are listening with you. It looks like a majority of you are flying solo here, but a couple of you, there's 2 of you, maybe even 3 of you. In some cases in the past, I think we've heard that there have been 4 or 5 people that are in a conference room or are huddled around a computer at a cube or in an office space. So this is nice. It gives us a good sense of how many people are on the line. So at this point, I'm going to turn the moderation of this webinar over to Mary Nix. Mary, as you may know, is the Deputy Director of Practice Improvement in the Center of Evidence and Practice Improvement at the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, and is going to lead our 2017 webinar series programming. So I'm very happy to have a chance to get to know Mary more through our work on the steering committee, and I'm pleased that she's moderating today's session. So Mary, I'm going to pass over control to you.
Thank you, Tom, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you could join us. This web event is a predecessor event for, as Tom noted, for the EGAPS 3 meeting. EGAPS, for those of you who don't know, stands for Evidence-Based Guidelines Affecting Practice, Policy, and Stakeholders. This will be the third event of EGAPS, And we're looking forward to it. And we're really excited that we could help set the stage for that event with this webinar. So the next slide, please. A reminder that the EGAPS-3 conference is not a scientific conference. And rather, it's a networking and collaborative event. And for the conference in March, there will be 3 tracks that you will pick from when you register, if you haven't registered already. One is impact and implementation, another is multi-stakeholder engagement, and the last one is trustworthiness of guidelines. And our web event today, as you can tell from the title, is really oriented around the second track. At the EGAPS meeting, there will be provocative plenaries because we think that in each of these tracks, there's going to be some pretty thought-provoking presentations. There are definitely issues to address in each of them. And there will be breakout sessions related. And it will culminate in what we call an unconference. And I'll talk about that next. But that unconference will actually lead to some commitments for ongoing collaboration and engagement. And I've included the link to the site where you can register to attend. Next slide, please. So what in the world is an unconference? I don't know if you've heard of this term before. I got exposed to it, oh gosh, a number of years ago. I guess it was back in 2006, where I attended an unconference. And an unconference is an event where the content of a conference is determined by the attendees. So there is some structure. You need to have a place. You need to know how many rooms you have. You need to know how much time there is. But really what happens is that the people who attend bring the content that they want to present or learn about. So it may not just be what you have a learning, what you want to share, but what you want to learn about. The underlying principle of an unconference is that passion drives learning and action. So keep that in mind today. Operationally, an unconference is kind of like whatever happens. You're really dependent on whoever shows up. The content that is generated is kind of the whatever and the whoever. But with it is that notion of the law of 2 feet, which means that if you're in a session that didn't turn out to be what you thought, you just move to another session. And to do that, you kind of have to have an open space where there's freedom to move. And then every unconference that I've been involved in has had some pre-events like this one, where we kind of you get oriented to an unconference and take the kind of the shell shock away from what an unconference is. And it uses social media. The EGAPS-3 meeting, because it was mostly designed, therefore won't be a classic unconference, but instead will be hybrid. And so during this web event today, what you can do is think about what are you passionate about relative to the topic area for today, but also about guideline development, implementation, use, updating, the whole life cycle of a guideline. And if you feel like, well, maybe you don't have a passion, but it's just your job, then think about on the other side, what are you most curious about? What do you need to know to do your job well? Okay, next slide, please. Well, that brings us to our first speaker. But before I have Stephanie begin, I would like to let you know that I've asked our 5 panelists who each bring unique perspectives to the topic of stakeholder engagement or collaboration to tell their story and identify what it is they are most passionate about regarding the topic. You know, we know that stakeholder engagement is important, and we have moved from why engage patients and consumers and other stakeholders, including clinicians, to how to most effectively tap their ideas and perspectives. Moreover, guideline developers are finding it challenging to identify the right stakeholders, particularly when it comes to consumers and patients who can offer an informed, balanced perspective as a guideline group member. You know, there's also ongoing debate about who is the best person to represent the public's views: patients, consumers, advocates, etc. The need to incorporate patients with multimorbidities into guideline recommendations is also driving multi-stakeholder engagement. Specialists alone cannot adequately address the needs of patients with comorbidities that are managed by primary care clinicians and others. And then finally, clinicians may need preparation and orientation to be able to contribute their perspectives to guideline efforts in an effective manner. And this all begs the question, what's the secret sauce to getting to a successful endpoint, and thus the title of our web event? Join me in listening to our speakers' stories, perspectives, and passions, and see if what lies within brings us closer to knowing what the secret sauce is. And before Stephanie begins, I'd like to highlight for you that in this event, each speaker will have 5 minutes to speak, followed by a 5-minute Q&A session. As a reminder, you will be sending your questions to the speaker through the chat feature. So let me introduce Ms. Jones, Stephanie Jones. Stephanie is the Director of Research and Quality Improvement for the American Academy of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery Foundation. Stephanie has been with the Academy for almost 10 years and is overseeing their guideline and consensus statement development program for the past 8 years. Most recently, she has also assumed oversight for the Academy's new measure stewardship and development efforts, which are still in their early stages. And now to you, Stephanie. You have the floor.
Great. Thanks, Mary. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah,
So what we wanted to start out here with is a little bit of a poll just so we can kind of see those that are joining us on the call, sort of what level each of you are. So this first poll question is really, are your guideline panels multidisciplinary? The yes, no, and somewhat would mean they may be multidisciplinary within the specialties of your, like for us at laryngology, we have rhinology, laryngology as sort of subspecialties. Full multidisciplinary though I'm referring to, are you engaging consumers? Are you engaging primary care, anesthesiologists outside of your existing specialty? It looks like the majority of the group is. I'm surprised to see how many are somewhat. So I'd be interested to learn a little more of that in the future. I'm going to, as Mary said, we only get 5 minutes, so I'm going to kind of keep moving forward, but it looks like about half the group is multidisciplinary, which I think is great. So the next question is, does your organization make guidelines available for public comment? I think it's interesting. I think Mary snuck in this, it's complicated. So I'm not really sure what that means.
No, that was Tom.
Or Tom?
No. I did, just because I think about, there might be, for public comment, maybe it's not available to the entire public, but maybe it's only available to members, or it might just be available to committees.
That's what I was thinking for somewhat as well, because I know many organizations, so public comment just to their membership, so it's kind of behind the login on their websites. And looking at the responses there, it looks like we have a pretty even split on the yes and the no's, and then the it's complicated and somewhat are pretty close as well. It's pretty interesting. The next question, do you make your guidelines available for peer review prior to journal submission? So when I say peer review, this is going out to all the pertinent stakeholders, identifying representatives from them, and having them review and submit comments on the guideline. I know when we started in our early days, we just went through journal submission. We didn't do this, but we had some challenges there. We felt we needed to do a broader review. So it looks like almost 40% of the group does, which is great. Surprised to see the volume that aren't. So that gives me a good sense of sort of what we're looking at with the group. And then the last question is about endorsement. Are you going out and actively seeking endorsement of your guidelines prior to publication? And it looks like we're pretty split, which is great, and I'm not surprised to see that. Okay, so I'm going to kind of keep moving on here since we have a limited time. I put this little graphic together just kind of to give us a framework of what I was going to talk to the group about. So for us, we start with our guideline task force, which includes all the specialty societies within otolaryngology, and that's where we receive all of the topics that are put up for consideration for developing guidelines for our specialty. They meet twice a year, and they vote on those topics. Once those topics are voted on and they're approved and they go into our development queue, we then take those topics and we register them with GIN. which I encourage other groups to do as well. In addition, we also post them publicly on our website. The goal here is that we're trying to be as transparent as possible and to share with other stakeholder groups what topics we have in the queue in hopes that we can eliminate any duplication in the future. The last thing we want to find out is that we've been plugging along for 10 months and another organization's been plugging on for 10 months on the same topic, because really we should be working together versus working independently. So I encourage others to definitely register on the GIN site and post publicly their topics. When we start developing the panels, we basically do planning calls with those who submitted the topics and identify all pertinent stakeholder groups. Now we try to keep our panels pretty reasonable in size. By reasonable I mean 15 to 20 on the panels. And we try to keep otolaryngology the minority on those panels. Because we don't want to have it perceived that we are the majority in pushing an agenda on the guideline groups. We do lock down all of the conference calls and the meeting dates in advance. We include a proposed timeline, and we also include the roles and responsibilities. All of those three things are sort of bundled excuse me, and submitted to the organization when we're recruiting panel members. And we have found that definitely by including all that information, that helps to give each stakeholder organization all the information they need to recruit volunteers. We typically give about 4 weeks to do this appointment. And we found that that works pretty well. We do allow a little bit of wiggle room in there, maybe 2 weeks, if some organizations have to go up to the boards to get approval of those volunteers. We then, also when we're recruiting from the stakeholders, we let them know that they're going to have 3 or 4 opportunities to be part of the process. So that way they're kind of thinking about their own internal needs and what they'll need to do to facilitate that. So obviously number one is identify individuals to go on the panels. The second piece is if it's a new guideline topic for us, we actually do release the quality improvement topics that we're considering for public comment, so that, and by public comment I mean fully open, not behind a firewall, to make sure that we're considering all quality improvement topics that folks think are important. Now those topics, we may come up with a list of 40. The panel will actually do the rank ordering to determine what ultimately gets included in the guidelines. But we want to make sure we're not missing anything. The next piece.
Yep, sorry to interrupt, but we're getting to the end of your 5 minutes.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
So basically then we also give them an opportunity for external review and public comment. We have recently started doing the endorsements, and we've had a great response to this. We basically didn't think it was appropriate for us to go out and solicit this, but our guideline task force really felt that was something important to be doing. And our most recent 3 guidelines, they'll be released January, February, March. We've gotten almost 100% endorsement from those panel organizations. So the last thing I wanted to just point out is, when Mary said the secret sauce, one of the big things for me is you need a really good contact list. I've been at the Academy for almost 10 years. I've been doing guidelines for 8. I've got a list of 170 people at multiple organizations, and this is where I go, because you've got to be able to get to the right people to recruit for these panels. So if you don't have a list, definitely start one, and I'm always happy to share mine. It's a work in progress, but I'm happy to share it with anyone. So with that, I'll conclude and see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Actually, a couple questions have come in, but I'm impressed by that table. That's very complete. I know it's something that we've tried to do here at ARC for our programs, is kind of create something like that. So I'm glad you shared that, even if it's a little challenging for folks to see. I think it just gets at that notion of why it's important, because it has that valuable information. So one of the questions came in was, do you seek external review input from healthcare organizations, not just individual physicians?
So we basically reach out to societies. I'm not sure if the question with healthcare organizations means like Kaiser or
like that.
Yeah, we don't actually have Kaiser on the list. I mean, I think we would love to. That's something I've actually been talking to a couple people about. I think it would be great if if there was like a forum where we could get to these people other than cold calling everyone. We can come up with a list, but if we knew what all the large healthcare systems were and who the people we could be going for, I think that would be a great asset and something we'd love to do in the future.
Well, kind of related to that, there's another question of, do you seek endorsement from healthcare organizations?
Marguerite. Marguerite and I have talked about that quite a bit, and we would love to have Kaiser endorse the guidelines. Again, it's really just getting those contacts because we don't really want to be cherry picking. I mean, obviously I know Marguerite at Kaiser and they're very active with Jen, but I think we have to make sure that we're being totally inclusive and not cherry picking.
Sure. So definitely something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question, and you may have mentioned it, and I just missed it. But so, do you or don't you include patients in your groups?
We do. We're actually I would say one of the early adopters. We work very closely with Q. Rich Rosenfeld, who's our lead methodologist, has been a huge advocate for Q over the years. So we've been working with them for probably about 6 years now. We try always to include at least 2 patient representatives on the panels. It's pretty rare that we actually get one that has the condition. And as most of the folks on the call know, Q actually just educates patients on how to review the evidence and how to be the voice for the consumer. So Q is our go-to. We've also got contacts at Picori as sort of our secondary organization. And then we'll always search to see if there's a patient advocacy group for the topic we're looking at. So like there's an American Tinnitus Association, which is a patient advocacy group for tinnitus that we partnered with on that guideline.
Have you ever used social media, Stephanie, as a way to maybe find informed patients who are engaged in this way, maybe beyond the usual places that you go? Have you ever?
We have not. We have not. Social media we really use for dissemination.
Sure.
There's the organization out there, Patients Like Me, that I try to work with, but they want to charge us fees to get access to the patients, which is not something we don't pay our guideline panelists. All of our efforts are solely funded by the Academy, and to pay to get access to the patients just didn't feel right to us. But if others are successful in getting to the patients via social media, I'd love to learn about it because that's definitely a difficult area to find the right people.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Let's see, I'm looking to see if we have any. Okay, so someone did write, just to let you know that that this person loves the contact list and has one as well, but they have found that approaching the same organizations with similar inquiries is a bit of a problem. Many are already involved in collaborative projects and all have resource limitations. Not sure if you wanted to comment on that, Stephanie.
So absolutely. We hear that a lot. Amir Kasim's group, the American College of Physicians, we hit them up a lot because we want a primary care physician on every one of our guidelines. And so, a lot of times they'll say, no, we don't have the resources, or it's not a high priority topic for us. Which is fine, and what we'll do is then we'll let them know. We'll keep them on the list, and we'll reach out to them when we get to that external review and that public comment, and we'll still try to engage them at that time. So even if they don't have the resources to put someone on the panel, we still want them to be involved in the process. So we definitely still keep them in the loop.
Thank you. All right, now let's go to our next panelist. Mr. Bill Vaughn. Bill spent 36 years working in the House of Representatives largely on health legislation. He was then a health lobbyist for groups like Consumer Reports magazine. In retirement, he's a member of the Board of Directors of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. He is also a volunteer in the Consumers United for Evidence-Based Healthcare, or CUE, Cochrane collaboration effort, and is a volunteer with the Virginia State Health Insurance Counseling Program. He recently completed service on an IOM FDA post-market approval drug safety study panel. Okay, Bill, take it away, please.
Well, thank you for having me. Talking about passion, my passion or my life work was trying to expand the level of health insurance in America. It's been a pretty frustrated life. Obviously, we're not succeeding and almost certainly taking some big steps backwards. But through all of this, I think a key to progress is to make insurance and healthcare more affordable. And to me, that means not paying for ineffective and even dangerous services. I believe we need practice guidelines that doctors support and that patients understand and respect, that get rid of waste, and that don't feel like cookbook medicine or rationing, which has been the rap, as you know. I would love to see things like choosing wisely more widely understood and widely adopted. And guidelines that only doctors consensus on may ignore patient concerns, and that's why non-conflicted patients need to be involved. I've been lucky to be on a couple great panels. I liked them, so I thought they were great. I was a consumer rep on a Bell's palsy panel. We seemed to have really surprised, there were two of us, really surprised the doctors on that panel by reporting that Bell's, hopefully short-term, but Bell's facial distortions created really, really severe emotional, even suicidal concerns in many, many patients. And the final guidelines gave good emphasis to considering the psychological needs of patients, an aspect that was not in the original draft or that any of the MDs were talking about. Another example, I was recently on an AFib guideline panel and thought the document failed to encourage family doctors to give basic education to patients on the arc or course of this condition, and an understanding of the full range of options, both pharmaceutical and surgical. And doctors needed to appreciate better the psychological stress a midnight thumping heart creates. You've probably all read Poe's Telltale Heart. Well, that has nothing on the terrors of an all-night fib, which, by the way, was a condition I had personal experience with. And the final document did pick up some of these concerns of being more educating on the full range of issues and on being aware of psychological stress. So patient participation, it's an evolving process. You know, when you think about 100 years ago, the AMA basically prohibited you doctors talking to patients about care choices. That was a verboten. So the progress has been huge, but it can be tough. I've been on panels where I have no advanced degree behind my name. It's just BA. I felt like Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, you know. I'd say something and people kind of stare off in the distance, and I don't think what I was saying was crazy. Maybe it was, but I don't think it was, and just totally ignored. So it can be tough, and patients have to learn how to express themselves, not aggressively. I mean, my gosh, I didn't go to med school. I barely spell half these words. But we do need to be persistent, and it's a delicate balance. And on that point, I posed a couple questions that may come up later in this. I don't know how this works, but may come up that are there things that patient consumer advocates do that are a turn-off to the medical community and that we should be more aware of as patients and avoid. I mean, the patients talk among themselves, and we make some fun of some of the medical types and the arrogance. You know, that doctor only talks to surgeons who only talk to God, and those kind of jokes. But they're not jokes. And at the same time, in humility, what is it that we do that makes us maybe not fully used or used as well as we could be? So with that, let me stop.
So Bill, it's Mary. Let me interrupt you for a minute. I'm not sure if you can see on.
Oh, I do now. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, on the web display, the question that you wanted to ask about, what do some consumer or patients do? What do they exhibit that may not be helpful to the process? And sorry about that. I set the 5-minute timer, and I used some of your time. But that's just I wanted to bring to attention that the audience has been filling in the response to your question. And you may be able to see the responses on the right-hand side of your screen. Do you see that?
I'm sorry, I've had a little trouble logging in, and I don't. But
okay, so I can tell you that it's kind of even between lacking subject knowledge or having their own agenda, and they talk too little. Those are kind of all coming in around the same response rate. Talking too much? No, not at all. And then some others, people have typed in their comments like they've lacked evidence-based medicine knowledge. So I wanted to let you know that there seems to be a three-way split by the audience of what consumers do that's not particularly helpful to the guideline process of lacking subject knowledge, having their own agenda, and talking too little. So I didn't know if you wanted to respond to that.
well, no, thank you. That's helpful, and I do worry about the agenda one. There are too many groups, in my opinion, are shills for some group trying to make money off of some particular approach. And that is not science, or it shouldn't be, or evidence. And I think the community needs to have a good discussion on conflict of interest issues, because clearly pharma and the device guys have tumbled to the fact that if they can find gadflies for their particular product, noisy wheel gets the grease, and they can move the debate, and that's not right, and it certainly isn't science.
Yeah, and I just had someone want a clarification of the question. What does it mean when patients have their own agenda? I'm not sure if you wanted to answer that.
Well, when you're paid to go to fancy conferences and fly around the country by a particular drug manufacturer and then push their particular drug, that's a conflict of interest. That's an agenda. Now, there are innocent agendas. So, my God, your child has this horrible disease and you would like it cured. That is, of course. But when you're bought hook, line, and sinker a company's approach to a particular product, that's not science.
Yeah, and Stephanie has posted a comment, but I wonder if you just want to voice it to Bill and the audience.
Oh, Mary, did you want me to say it? So sure. I responded to the poll saying that many times our patients don't talk enough because they're in a room with clinicians, which is very intimidating. And so what we've done is we've kind of identified specific tasks to engage them. We try to develop more shared decision-making tools for embedding in the guideline. So we'll pair the consumer up, usually with the nurse panel person, to develop those FAQs for review by the rest of the panel. And we've also started developing plain language summaries, which we have a staff person that drafts, but then they work with the nurse and the consumer to make sure that the reading levels are at a reasonable level, as well as that they're clear. So I think they feel engaged when they have those specific assignments.
That's interesting, because I think you have articulated, Stephanie, what another participant of our webinar today said, that we framed the question as what's not helpful, but these could also be thought of as opportunities or even assets that they can bring. And I think that you've shown that you can tap into those assets as you see them in ways that are effective for your program. So yeah, that's part of the reason why I wanted you to speak to your comment. Thank you.
Sure.
So let's move now. Thank you so much, Bill. I know you may not have gotten to say everything you wanted, but maybe we'll get back to it. And so let's move to our next speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jose Luis Mayorga Boutron. He is a practicing physician and associate professor of pediatric otolaryngology in the Department of Otolaryngology and Head and Neck Surgery at the National Institute of Pediatrics and the National University of Mexico. He's also coordinator of the Evidence-Based Medicine Committee, the Mexican Society of Otolaryngology and Head and Neck Surgery, and a professor in the Master in Science program at the National University of Mexico. Jose Luis, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the people from GNA for the opportunity to collaborate with them. It has been a great experience for me to work with people with such a passionate regarding clinical practice guidelines. It's about passion that I would like to talk because it's very important to be patient about that. You will find a lot of barriers talking about clinical practice guidelines. In the developing world, in developing countries, we have a lot of barriers to work in collaboration to develop and to implement clinical practice guidelines. What's the drive that allow us to work on that? When I was a little boy, I loved to go with my dad to his organic chemistry lab. He was working to obtain his PhD degree at the Institut National Polytechnique of Toulouse in chemistry. I was marveled with all the durable glass breakers, liquids, alcohol, lamps, thermometer, test tubes. The chemical reactions when you mix them were awesome. I was interested in science since then and in the years after. I claim my conviction that scientific method is the path to. Hello?
Hello? Are you there, Jose? Jose Luis? Hello?
Oh, I hope. I
Yes?
don't know that. Oh, there you are, Jose.
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, hear you now.
Okay.
You were telling the story about your... Yes, go ahead.
Yes, well, during my years at the ear, nose, and throat residency program at the National Medical Center, I barely heard about evidence-based medicine. Decision-making was based on the opinion of our partners and sometimes the senior surgeons. Most of the time, literature applies I consider only the results and conclusion sections. Evidence-based medicine was looked like a threat to the expertise to the senior surgeons. That environment was a definitive reflex of almost all the residency programs in medicine 15 years ago in my country. One of my favorite quotes of that incredible writer of all times, named Oscar Wilde, is, "The world belongs to the discontented." People that are discontented with the established push forward the human progress. They aim to improve the quality of life for everyone. They love what they do, and they put all their heart and mind to reach their goals. They won't be truly satisfied until they get it done. To improve health is an excellent task. Most of us have experienced health issues with family or friends, even with ourselves. And it is not infrequent to witness wide variations of clinical decisions between healthcare professionals. Sometimes clinical interventions with a lack of scientific support still being part of the daily clinical practice. That brings the question, what could I bring to the table that will have a greater impact on the patients and my community? I think that clinical practice guidelines aim to close the gap between science and clinical decision-making, assist practitioners and patients in their shared decision-making progress, and have demonstrated to improve healthcare. That knowledge of purpose will give us the conviction and courage to do our best to help our patients, to follow our consciousness and pursue our patients, and forge our path. That's why we invite you to join us in the EGAP stream as we use our lived experience trying to improve clinical practice guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose Luis. Any questions for Jose Luis from the audience? Please send them in. You know, Jose, we recognize that you're really just beginning that process there. And so I wonder, do you have any questions for either Stephanie or Bill that could inform what it is you're trying to do? Was there anything that you wanted to ask them? I would say you could ask Brian and Craig too, but we haven't heard their pieces yet. So I'm not sure if you had heard anything that they may have said that sparked an interest in you and what your goal is, and it's something that you might want to learn more about.
Yes, of course. I think that one of the main topics that has been discussed in this webinar is about the involvement of the patients. I think that it's one of the most important things in order to improve implementation of the clinical practice guidelines. You have to involve the patients in all the process, but sometimes it's not easy. I think that it is our most important area of opportunity in Mexico, because we have done that in the few projects, but we don't know really how to do that.
Well, I hope that through this web event and what is conveyed at the EGAPS 3, Jose Luis, that you'll learn what that secret sauce is. And so I think this is a good time to, folks, you can still send your questions in for Jose Luis, but to keep us moving and on time, I'm going to transition now to our next speaker, Brian O'Rourke, and I'm going to challenge Brian to see how quickly he can get through his material, just so that we can stay on time and make sure that Craig has some time. So Dr. Brian O'Rourke is the President and Chief Executive Officer at CADTH, the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health. He joined CADTH in January of 2009 following a distinguished career as a pharmacist and a health service executive with the Canadian military. With over 30 years of experience in healthcare, Brian actively positions CADTH as the leading source of health technology information in Canada. He has a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy from Dalhousie University and a Doctor of Pharmacy from the University of Toronto. Brian also serves as the Board Chair for the International Network of Agencies for Health Technology Assessment, or INATA. Thank you, Brian O'Rourke, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you to the Guidelines International Network, North American group, for inviting me to participate. Particularly since I don't represent the guidelines community, I'm here representing the health technology assessment community. But there are a lot of similarities between guideline development and HTA. And in fact, through INATA, the International Network of Agencies for Health Technology Assessment, with 52 HTA agencies and 33 countries around the world, we actually do a lot of partnering. And one of our partners is the Guidelines International Network. We have an MOU with GIN, and we've created last year a joint working group called GINATA. Very early on, but we're looking at 4 general areas of partnership. One is awareness of the work we each do. Second, the methods that we employ. Third, the impact that we're having. And the fourth, stakeholder engagement. So that brings me a little bit to what I'm here to talk about. If we move to my survey question here, and it brings a little bit about my passion. My passion is to ensure that the people who we produce our work for in HTA, both clinicians and policymakers, actually use that information. And one of the ways that we can increase the impact and the uptake of the work that we do is by engaging patients, and we've learned a lot from that. So let me just see what we've got for some results. So formal way looks like about 2/3 of the people do have a formal and structured way. And in the HTA community, again, we're really trying to promote formal processes for engaging patients. So let me back up a little bit. CADTH, We're a not-for-profit corporation in Canada. We're set up in accordance with our Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. We're not government, but we're funded mostly by the Canadian government, our federal government, and all of our provinces and territories. We were established in 1989 to enhance the health of Canadians by promoting the optimal use of health technologies. So we've got a number of programs, products, and services. We divide our work into two very distinct areas, one being pharmaceuticals and one being medical devices, which we would classify as medical, dental, surgical devices, procedures, programs, and diagnostics. Lots of staff that do the work. We have clinicians and scientists and health economists, librarians, project managers, etc. Academic contractors that we use. We've got a number of advisory bodies and 3 expert committees, multidisciplinary expert committees that make the recommendations on the technologies that we assess. In our assessments of technologies, we produce a clinical report doing a systematic review of the clinical evidence, both the benefits and harms. We do an economic report based on some modeling or a cost effectiveness or a cost utility analysis on the economic evidence, and we engage stakeholders in a deliberate and structured way. 4 groups of stakeholders that we try and engage with: patients, clinicians, the health system themselves, and industry. My focus today will be on patients because, as I say, that's the group that I'm most passionate about. So at CADTH, we involve patients in a number of ways. We have a patient liaison forum with 4 of the larger umbrella patient groups in Canada: the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders, Canadian Cancer Action Network, Best Medicines Coalition, and Health Charities Coalition of Canada. We run an open consultation session every year for any patient, either face-to-face or by webinar, to participate in, to talk a little bit about the work we do. We do a number of webinars and training sessions. We have an annual conference, and we ensure that we welcome patients to all of these types of events. We have public or patient representatives on our board of directors and those 3 expert committees that I talked about. And most importantly, we seek input from patients in the reviews that we do, and we've adapted the approach that we take based on experience and the type of review that we're doing. For example, with medical devices and the diagnostics and disease state or care pathways, a few examples of projects that we've done or we've got underway: we're looking at the modalities for dialysis, obstructive sleep apnea, imaging for pulmonary embolism. So for the medical devices, we do a systematic review of the literature on patient preferences and experiences, and then we also do some targeted interviews of patients and caregivers. For our drug class reviews, therapeutic class reviews, a few examples: new drugs for hepatitis C, anti-VEGF drugs for retinal conditions, and we're currently doing one on second-line therapies for type 2 diabetes. Here we allow patient groups to comment on our draft report and recommendations before they go to final print. And then most importantly, our single drug reviews. So in Canada, we have a regulator, Health Canada, similar to the FDA or the EMA in Europe. They provide the market authorization, but they don't provide any funding recommendation. So all of the public payers in Canada, whether they're in the province or a federal program, they wait to provide listing or funding approval until our review is done. So we provide a recommendation through one of our 2 drug expert committees to all of the provinces and territories. And they follow our recommendations about 94% of the time. So with our common drug review and our pan-Canadian oncology drug review, we look at all of the new drugs that have been approved in Canada and new indications. We have a formal call for patient input for every drug that we review, and we've received input for almost every drug that we've reviewed since we started introducing patient input in 2010. We use a templated process. We ask the patients a series of questions. First off, they need to declare any conflicts of interest. So we ask them about the impact of the condition, any experience they have with current treatment options, impact on caregivers, and their expectations for the new drug. The groups use a variety of formats for gathering information to try and be as inclusive and representative as possible. So they'll use social media, some interviews, focus groups, surveys, etc. We then compile all of the input we received. We produce a patient input report, and that goes to one of our 2 drug expert committees. They use a formal deliberative process. They'll look at the clinical benefits and harms in comparison with current standards of care. They'll look at our patient report, the patient preferences, and usually it's patients on our committees that present those reports. Then they look at the economics and any implementation issues. And they make a vote via secret ballot on one of 3 recommendation options, either reimburse it as per the proposal by the manufacturer, reimburse it with some conditions put on it, either clinical restrictions or some cost reductions, or not to reimburse it based on the drug not having any clinical benefit over current therapy. So we've been doing that for a number of years, and after about 3 to 4 years of experience, we decided to do a review to look at the strengths of our process and the issues and opportunities, just to make sure that what we were doing was meaningful from a patient perspective. So we looked at 30 drugs that we had reviewed over about a year period under our CADTH Common Drug Review Program, specifically to identify all of the outcomes that patients identified as being important. And they identified 119 outcomes for those 30 drugs. And that word map that you see displays some of the most common outcomes identified by the patient groups. And interesting to see that their most important ones are things like symptom relief, improving my quality of life, getting fewer side effects and things like that. Real tangible outcomes of importance to the patients, not things like lowering my hemoglobin A1C or doing better on the 6-minute walk test. So then we compared those outcomes, the outcomes of importance to patients, with the outcomes that were measured in the pivotal clinical trial used to gain regulatory approval for those 30 drugs. And the results were that only 50% of the outcomes of importance to patients were included in the clinical trial. So that made us do a lot of thinking. Even our expert committees only looked at about 60% of the outcomes that the patients told us were important. So we've made a number of adjustments to our process, and we're really trying to change the culture of patient engagement from one being about patient-reported outcomes to one being about patient-important outcomes. And I'll pause there, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. I think you've used your whole time slot in your presentation. And I want to make sure that we can hear from Dr. Craig Robbins. But before I introduce him, I want to let you know that one of your fellow panelists sent in a comment noting that the word cost is in pretty small print in that word cloud slide, and wondered, for U.S. patients who don't have insurance, what they would say about cost of the new drug, and noted it could be a fun comparison. I get that, I'm not sure how much cost is a part of what you look at when you do drug assessments, but because it's one of the items here as asked of the patient groups, it did come out as interesting to Bill that cost had such a small accounting for those outcomes.
Yeah, for the public payers it would be much more significant, of course.
Yes.
It was an issue for the patients as well.
Okay, so let's move on. Because we do only have until 3 o'clock in Eastern Time. So next up is Dr. Craig Robbins. Since 2012, Dr. Robbins has served as Medical Director, Center for Clinical Information Services at the Kaiser Permanente Care Management Institute in Oakland, California. In this role, he continues to serve as a Medical Director of Kaiser Permanente's National Guideline Program, having done so since 2009. He's also served as a Medical Director for Clinical Guidelines for Kaiser's Colorado region from 2005 to 2014. In addition, he has an appointment as Clinical Associate Professor at University of Colorado School of Medicine, Department of Family Medicine. He has extensive expertise and experience in critical appraisal of medical research literature, primary care practice, and implementation of evidence-based recommendation. Dr. Robbins sits on the Executive Advisory Board of the Kaiser Permanente Research Affiliates Evidence-Based Practice Center, or EPC, and he's on the Board of Trustees of GIN. Welcome, Dr. Robbins, and unfortunately, you're going to have to rush right through your presentation. So regrets about that, but see if you can handle the challenge. Thank you.
All right. No worries. Thanks very much, Mary. Why don't we actually start then with my slide, and then we can come back to the question. So as Mary said, I'm with Kaiser Permanente, and we are the largest integrated delivery system, the largest private integrated delivery system in the U.S. And you might wonder why we do clinical practice guidelines. The reason we do them is largely for our own internal audience. At KP, we really have a great setup in being able to write clinical guidance that gets handed off to a delivery system and implemented at the point of care. And that's the point of the slide that I put up, is that ultimately the most important place to engage patients in the process is really at that point of care, and that's the work that we try to do. We have this idea around trying to standardize to the evidence but personalizing to the patient. At the National Guideline Program, we've been involved with GIN for several years. We adopted the GRADE methodology for organizing our guideline development work, and we realized, in 2011, when the IOM published its reports on systematic reviews and clinical practice guidelines, that you can trust that an area that we really needed to start thinking about was how to engage patients in the process of our guideline development. So this continues to be a work in progress. I won't say that we have this figured out. In fact, we were just talking about this at a couple of our at our national guideline meetings last week about how to do this better. And kind of along the lines of what Stephanie and the others have presented, we're kind of thinking at the level of oversight and having patients and our members help us figure out what topics to cover within a particular guideline, thinking about the scope of that guideline, what are the important clinical questions, and what outcomes are most important for them. We'd also are interested in learning from others like the AAO about putting members or putting patients onto our guideline development teams as they do that work, and then also thinking about engaging them in the final stakeholder review. But one thing that we've learned over the years is that the evidence only takes us but so far. The best a high-quality body of evidence can do is to give us more confidence in estimated treatment effects, but everything we offer to our patients involves some amount of balancing the potential benefits versus the potential harms. And we've really started to focus a lot on shared decision making. That's where a lot of us have passion right now, is that what we'd like to do is bring the best available evidence to our clinicians and to their patients, help them understand those, help them understand the best estimates we have on these things, and make health decisions that align with their own values and preferences and health goals. So if we have a moment for the question, if you want to put that back up, I'd just be interested in what people think about what the primary focus of guideline development efforts should be. Should it be clinical practice recommendations? Should it be shared decision-making tools? Something else that you could type into chat. So I'll stop there since we're almost out of time.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for improvising. I think I think you did a great job, and I know that you won't be able to participate in the EGAPS 3 meeting, Craig, but I hope someone from your team can, and can continue to bring this perspective to the conference and the Unconference portion of it. Let's see.
Yeah, absolutely. There will be other folks from Kaiser Permanente there. And it looks like the responses are about 50-50.
Yeah,
on shared decision with you. So that's very interesting. That's kind of where we are too.
That's very interesting. And someone has typed in patient diaries, I guess as an other type, where their efforts are focused. So yeah, I think that it would be great to continue this discussion with us on the LinkedIn Guidelines, GIN North America LinkedIn channel. You can join that community online by going to linkedin.com/group/8245 614-3949. If you're not already part of that group, it would be great to continue this conversation and get prepared for the EGAPS 3 and the Unconference portion. Think about your curiosity and passion in this space. And questions that you have that you didn't get to ask any of our panelists, you could do it there through LinkedIn and at the event, assuming that our panelists can come. And to Brian's point about there are relationships, there's some synergies between technology assessments and guideline development, kind of all starting with a review of the evidence. And something that I've wondered about is, if you have patient engagement in the systematic review step, how do you continue to work them through into guideline development? Or do you get different patient consumers or other stakeholders to do that? So that's an interest that I have, is kind of where do they overlap if they do it all? So a big thank you to our panelists today. They were challenged and they rose to the challenge, and I thank them for that. And as Tom notes, you can connect with us in a number of different ways. I want to thank you for your time today, and please stay tuned for more announcements that will be coming your way about activities of GIN North America. And most importantly, on behalf of Tom and the rest of the steering committee for GIN North America, we wish you a very happy holidays. Thank you very much. Thank you.